The first thing most people notice is her dress. The second thing they notice is what they think it means. For centuries, viewers have looked at this woman and reached the same conclusion that she is pregnant. It feels obvious. The shape of her gown, the way she gently gathers the fabric across her body, even the calm expression on her face all seem to point in the same direction. But what if that first impression is completely wrong? What if one of the most famous paintings in history has been misunderstood for hundreds of years? And what if every object inside this room, from a tiny dog to a single burning candle, was carefully placed to tell a story that most people never notice? This is the Arnolfini portrait, painted in 1434 by the extraordinary Flemish artist Jan van Eyck. At first glance, it appears simple. A wealthy man and woman stand inside an elegant room. They face the viewer quietly, almost formally, as though they paused for a moment while someone captured their image. But the longer you look, the stranger everything becomes. Nothing seems accidental. Every object appears to have been chosen for a reason. Every reflection raises another question. And nearly 600 years later, historians are still debating exactly what Jan van Eyck wanted us to see. To understand the mystery, we first have to step back into 15th century Bruges. During the early 1400s, Bruges was one of Europe's richest trading cities. Merchants from Italy, Germany, France, and England traveled there with silk, spices, precious metals, expensive cloth, and luxury goods from across the known world. Among those merchants was a prosperous Italian businessman connected to the wealthy Arnolfini family. Whoever commissioned this painting wanted more than a portrait. They wanted a statement. Look around the room. The clothes alone reveal enormous wealth. The man's dark garments are made from costly fabrics trimmed with luxurious fur. His oversized hat was fashionable but expensive, and every fold of his clothing speaks of status rather than practicality. The woman's brilliant green gown uses an astonishing amount of cloth. Today it may simply look beautiful. In 1434, it represented a fortune. Large quantities of dyed fabric were incredibly expensive, and only the wealthiest families could afford clothing with such dramatic folds and flowing sleeves. Even the fur lining carried social meaning. Nothing here was cheap. Nothing here was ordinary. Then there are the oranges. To modern eyes, they seem insignificant. But in medieval Northern Europe, oranges were rare imported luxuries. They traveled hundreds of miles before reaching Bruges. Displaying several of them inside a home was like displaying wealth itself. They quietly announced that the owners belonged to the highest level of society. The room itself tells the same story. The carved wooden furniture, the polished brass chandelier, the carefully made bed, the oriental carpet. Every detail whispers the same message. Success, prosperity, prestige. Yet despite all this wealth, one object immediately draws your attention for a completely different reason. A tiny dog stands between the couple, small enough to be overlooked, important enough that scholars have discussed it for generations. In medieval art, dogs often represented loyalty and faithfulness. That interpretation led many historians to believe the painting celebrated marriage. A faithful dog, a husband, a wife, hands joined together. It seemed like the perfect visual symbol of a wedding. But later researchers noticed something else. Dogs also appear on medieval tomb sculptures, especially near the feet of noble women. Instead of celebrating life, they sometimes symbolized companionship beyond death. One small animal, two completely different meanings. And that is exactly what makes this painting so fascinating. Every symbol can be read in more than one way. Now look at their hands. The man gently holds the woman's right hand while raising his left. At first glance, it resembles the gesture of someone making a solemn promise. For decades, many scholars believed this represented the exchange of marriage vows. That theory became especially famous during the 20th century when art historian Erwin Panofsky argued that the painting was actually documenting a marriage ceremony. According to his interpretation, Jan van Eyck wasn't simply painting a portrait. He was recording a real event, almost like a legal witness. That idea became even more convincing because of something written on the wall behind them. Most artists sign their paintings quietly in a corner. Jan van Eyck did something entirely different. Above the mirror, written in elegant script, are the words, "Jan van Eyck was here. Not painted by Jan van Eyck. Not made by Jan van Eyck. Simply, Jan van Eyck was here." Those words sound less like an artist's signature and more like someone confirming they personally witnessed whatever happened inside this room. It is one of the most unusual signatures in the entire history of Western art. And directly beneath those words hangs perhaps the greatest masterpiece inside the masterpiece itself. The mirror. At first it appears ordinary. Then you realize it reflects the entire room. Not just the couple. Everything. The doorway. The window. The chandelier. Even two additional figures standing near the entrance. One may be wearing blue. The other appears dressed in red. Who are they? Panofsky believed one of them was Jan van Eyck himself. The artist quietly inserted his own reflection into the painting. If true, he isn't just showing us the room. He has placed himself inside history, standing silently as an observer, watching the moment unfold. But history rarely remains simple. Years after Panofsky introduced his famous theory, historians uncovered documents that created an unexpected problem. The couple he identified could not have been married in 1434. Records suggested that particular Giovanni Arnolfini married years later, after Jan van Eyck had already died. Suddenly, the entire interpretation collapsed. If Panofsky had identified the wrong couple, could he also have misunderstood the purpose of the painting? Researchers began searching through family records once again. Another possibility slowly emerged. Perhaps the man was a different member of the Arnolfini family. Another successful merchant living in Bruges. If that identification is correct, the story becomes far more emotional. His wife may have died shortly before the painting was created. And that possibility changes almost everything. Look up toward the chandelier. It contains several candle holders, but only one candle burns. The flame appears above the man. The candle above the woman remains dark. Some historians believe this is no coincidence. Throughout medieval Europe, burning candles often represented life, while extinguished candles could symbolize a life that had ended. No one can say with certainty that this was Jan van Eyck's intention. But the possibility is difficult to ignore. Then there is the chair behind the woman. Look closely enough and you'll notice a tiny carved figure. It represents Saint Margaret. She was widely associated with childbirth and the protection of mothers. If the woman truly died during childbirth, this carving suddenly becomes deeply personal. Yet there is no document proving that happened. Only clues, possibilities, interpretations. The painting never gives us a direct answer. Instead, it leaves us with carefully arranged evidence, almost like a mystery waiting to be solved. Now let's return to the question almost everyone asks. Is she pregnant? Surprisingly, we simply don't know. There is no historical record confirming a pregnancy. What we do know is that wealthy women during the 15th century often lifted the front of heavy gowns exactly as she does here. The style created a rounded silhouette that modern viewers naturally associate with pregnancy. But fashion changes. What seems obvious today may have meant something entirely different 600 years ago. Jan van Eyck painted other women using remarkably similar poses. Even religious figures such as the Virgin Mary were shown wearing flowing garments gathered at the front. The pose itself was fashionable, not necessarily symbolic. If anything, the enormous quantity of cloth advertised wealth rather than motherhood. For a successful cloth merchant, displaying expensive fabric was almost like displaying the finest products in his business. Even the smallest details continue this pattern. The wooden floor, the fruit, the bed, the shoes placed on the ground, the carved furniture, the glass window. Every object has inspired countless books, lectures, and debates. Some interpretations agree. Others completely contradict each other. And perhaps that is exactly why this painting refuses to lose its power. Unlike many masterpieces, it never fully explains itself. Instead, it invites every generation to ask new questions. Was this a wedding? A legal record? A celebration of wealth? A memorial for a beloved wife? Or did Jan van Eyck intentionally combine several meanings into one extraordinary image? Perhaps the greatest achievement of the painting is not that it provides answers. It is that it continues to create questions. For nearly 600 years, millions of people have stood before this work believing they understood what they were seeing, only to discover that certainty disappears the longer they look. The Arnolfini portrait reminds us that history is rarely as straightforward as it first appears. Paintings are not merely pictures. Sometimes they are puzzles. Sometimes they are witnesses. Sometimes they preserve emotions that written records can never capture. And somewhere in Bruges in the year 1434, Jan van Eyck stood before this remarkable couple, or perhaps before the memory of one of them, and created an image so rich with detail that centuries later we are still searching for its true meaning. Maybe that was his intention all along. Not to give us a single story, but to leave behind a mystery that time itself could never completely solve.